Today's show is sponsored by Okta, the leading independent identity solution. Okta provides best-in-class authorization so your customers and workforce can safely access what they need most right when they need it from anywhere. Organizations around the world trust Okta's Identity Cloud to sign in, authorize, and manage users, whether it's employees, contractors, partners, or customers. And with Okta's developer tools, you'll never have to build authentication again. Our customizable code blocks are flexible and future-proof with easy-to-use APIs and SDKs, so you can do less coding and more shipping. Okta is dedicated to building the most reliable, neutral identity platform because it means protecting more than a login. Identity is protecting people, their ideas, their work, their brilliance. It's protecting your future with confidence. Learn more at okta.com. That's OKTA.com.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. We continue to move forward in May of 2021, I guess. Yes, it is 2021. Sometimes you forget, time flies. This week's Cloud News of the Week is going to be all about money. We're going to talk about a lot of transactions going on, some earnings announcements. So let's get right to it. All three of the sort of big three cloud providers announced their quarterly earnings. Alphabet, Google, Amazon, and AWS, and then Microsoft and Azure all announced their numbers. It was a quarter in which all of them were up quite a bit. Amazon was up 30% quarter over quarter. Google was up 46% quarter over quarter. Microsoft with Azure was up 23%. So good numbers for everybody, quite a bit of growth. And obviously, we're still seeing the impacts of people working from home with the pandemic. So I did cover a little bit of that in terms of, these numbers sound very much like healthy growth numbers, especially at large baselines of where they are. But, is the cloud growing fast enough? We covered that on the Sunday Perspective show. So if you get a chance to go back and give that a listen. Second sort of bundle of things was Sysdig, who has been in the cloud native space doing security in the cloud native space, raised a round of about $190 million, actually $189 million. To help expand their business, both containers, security, and monitoring for the cloud native space and for the container space. So congratulations to the Sysdig team. We've had Dan Pop on the show before. We've talked about Sysdig in the past. And then a couple of acquisitions that hit the wire. IBM acquired Turbonomic. So we have talked about Turbonomic and their sort of AI-driven monitoring and operational tooling in the past. So IBM acquires Turbonomic, and Microsoft acquired Kinvolk. Kinvolk, a company who, smaller company, less than 50 people or so, was really focused on sort of Linux kernel, some technology around that. And so they were acquired by the group within Azure that is very focused on containers. So Brendan Burns group that does AKS and a lot of the tooling that they acquired from the Deus group and some folks like that. So good to see a lot of healthy activity, a lot of financial activity going on in the market this week. So I'm going to wrap up Cloud News of the Week. We always like to make sure we cover the quarterly announcements. We'll get Alibaba's, I think, should be out next week, and that should wrap up for the big 5 or 6. And then obviously we'll look and see what news comes out of KubeCon this week. We'll probably touch on those next week in Cloud News of the Week. So with that, we're going to wrap up. And being as it is Cloud Native Con and KubeCon this week, we're going to talk a little more about Kubernetes because a lot of you gave us some great feedback on the show about where does Kubernetes go next. So we're going to dive a little bit into what do we do for stateful applications like databases on Kubernetes right after the break. Today's show is sponsored by CBT Nuggets. We know that Cloudcast listeners are curious about technologies, but how are you really learning to master the technologies needed to be a cloud expert? When Aaron and I got started, we had to buy books, set up labs, find experts, and then hope something didn't crash. CBT Nuggets makes it easy to either get hands-on skills or get certified with the latest cloud technologies. Whether it's AWS, Azure, cloud automation, security, or app dev, CBT Nuggets has you covered. What I really liked about CBT Nuggets is the online instructors are both knowledgeable and they keep it interesting. Their courses have built-in test questions, virtual coaching to help plan your certification path, and I can always jump into a virtual lab to get hands-on at any time. Check it out at cbtnuggets.com/cloudcast to sign up for a free learner account. This unlocks tons of great training and you'll be entered into a drawing for a free 6-month premium subscription. That's cbtnuggets.com/cloudcast. Today's show is sponsored by Datadog, a real-time monitoring platform that unifies metrics, logs, and distributed request traces from your cloud containers and orchestration software. Track the health and performance of your dynamic containers, apps, and services with rich visualizations and machine learning-driven events. Datadog's Cluster Agent streamlines data collection from large container clusters and allows you to autoscale Kubernetes workloads based on any metric you're already collecting with Datadog. To start monitoring your container clusters, sign up for a free trial today, and Datadog will send you a free t-shirt. Visit datadog.com/cloudcast to get started. That's datadog.com/cloudcast. And we're back. And folks, we did a show about a week or so ago. We were talking about Kubernetes, and obviously Kubernetes is a topic that I get into quite a bit in my regular sort of day-to-day work. We don't cover it as much here on this show as maybe we should. But there was just so much feedback and really good positive vibes about Kubernetes from folks. We thought we'd dive into a topic that I see all the time and I think is always sort of useful, which is, what do you do for applications that aren't stateless that run on Kubernetes? So things like databases and data-centric applications. And so we're very excited today to have Anil Kumar, who is Director of Product Management at Couchbase. And we're going to kind of dig into, how do we run these applications, databases on Kubernetes? So Anil, welcome to the show. Great to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's an honor to be in your show today, Brian.
Oh, I appreciate it. Before we dive into, kind of talking about this topic around Kubernetes, give us a little bit of your background, kind of, what you've done in the past and what brought you to working around the Kubernetes space and especially databases in Kubernetes.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. I've been with Couchbase for more than 8 years, leading the product management team for our flagship product, Couchbase Server. And also the initiative I have taken for last 4 years is the stuff on the cloud native database, especially on Kubernetes. This has been my primary focus at this point in the company. Before I joined Couchbase, I spent almost 7 years working at Microsoft in the entertainment and Windows Live division. So overall, if I put together, I have spent 18 plus years building technologies specialized in distributed database, data replication, and scaling infrastructure. Right? And so my journey with the whole containers and Kubernetes in Couchbase has been my primary focus. As I said, been working on the containerizing Couchbase, Kubernetizing the Couchbase, and building this cloud native database on the Kubernetes.
Oh, very cool. Very, very cool. So yeah, you've lived through not only the Couchbase technology maturing, but you've seen it. You've seen sort of the maturity of Kubernetes. So excellent. So, I'll get started. Kubernetes sort of started with this focus around, cloud native apps, which, was sort of shorthand for people saying, stateless applications. And I'm curious how you guys have seen the market evolve, because there was a point where, the market sort of said, hey, what about us? Don't forget about stateful applications. What are we supposed to do with our data? I'm really curious, how Couchbase kind of evolved with it as well.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. In fact, I think it's worth telling a short story about this journey of stateful services on Kubernetes platform, or in general, the containerization of the stateful services itself, right? So if I go back in time in 2016, when we all saw a hockey stick hype cycle with the adoption of the container technologies. And we all know it was a great fit or great architecture for stateless applications, but there was a significant concern or skepticism about running the stateful workloads, such as a database on containers. There were concerns about the reliability. Containers are lightweight, and so when they die, what happens with your data? So there were a lot of those concerns, and in the maturity of the product itself, right? It was about maturity of containers, and so. And you would see at that time, many well-known authors, they would have published articles about talking about why not to run the database on containers. And there was you'll see this titles, which is is containers a good fit for databases?
Right.
And so then there was a slight change in the tone in 2017, right? And so we started talking about containerizing the database for the small use cases or dev and test use cases. You definitely dev and test. you want to containerize your database and for the faster development, faster testing. And so there was that initial, hey, this is a great fit for running the database on containers. And again, this was like the same trend. You'll see there's many other databases, the authors started publishing about running the database on a containers for non-production use cases.
Right.
And then fast forward 2019, suddenly the containerized databases were ready for production. And so it did take a lot of, there were multiple attempts and multiple things, but what was needed was the proper framework or like the platform maturity. And it was only possible when we started seeing this framework emerging, which was the Kubernetes operator framework, which actually gave us, and also the stateful sets, which was also a new type, was new type of container which came into the Kubernetes. That actually gave this it made it possible for building a native integration with Kubernetes and containerizing your database to run on the Kubernetes platform. Right?
Yeah.
And now 2021, and I can tell you for sure the containerization of database is going mainstream, and so for various reasons, and I'll talk about when I talk to the customers and prospects and community people, and what I hear from them is about in the past it was about hey, we want to run the database because we are adopting microservices architecture, but now I think it's more and more about standardization of development, cloud infrastructure, security, networking, and so on.
Right. Well, and I think you really kind of highlighted a lot of sort of the evolution, right? We went from, we had to create the idea of stateful sets. That was, there was a lot of back and forth about hey, should that even come into Kubernetes? Then we've gone through this evolution of, how do we get, storage to become simpler to deploy? So, we had to go through container storage interface. We had to, the idea of sort of dynamic PVs and storage classes. And so it's been that. And then what's really been interesting to me is I feel like there's kind of this chicken and egg between there'll be some early customers, early companies who say, we're going to try this out. And to a certain extent, and I know this from having been on the vendor side of the world, you're sort of like, are you sure you want to do that? I'm not, and then at some point they go, hey, it really works. And then, you get the vendors who go, oh, no, we knew it was really going to work. And here's 3 more other things that we did to make it better. So yeah, it's been, but you're right. That operator framework has been sort of that next level of taking it, to making it interesting.
Exactly. Yeah, and to validate that exactly what you said is that's kind of typically what going to happen for us, which was there were a handful of initial customers who they wanted to run the Couchbase, a distributed database, a NoSQL distributed database on containers, and again initially their goal was they wanted to simplify their platform, run both stateless and stateful on the same platform, but again that was a push we needed, right? Yeah. So there was. And in 2017, I do remember we partnered with one of our customers, in this case, Amadeus, and Red Hat was our strategic partners at the time, and we Couchbase. We 3 got together, and obviously Amadeus gave us the requirement, and Red Hat and Couchbase worked together to build this proof of concept in some sense. It was about, hey, let's explore the idea of running the Couchbase on the OpenShift. And so we showcased this in Red Hat Summit in 2017. It went really well. In fact, it was the session was full session. People were talking about how they're interested in to know how you can run a database on containers on the OpenShift. And so from there on, our journey of building this product and shipping it to the customers happened.
Yeah, it is really sort of interesting because, I mean, obviously the things that people ask questions about aren't unique to Kubernetes. They want to know what happens if something fails, what happens to my data. So I mean, they're common things like how do I replicate them? But then once they're sort of gotten past those challenges, then they start asking the questions of, well, what can Kubernetes do that's above and beyond? How do I use the scaling that's built into there? How do I be more deterministic on stuff? And yeah, that's always an interesting transition. I'm curious. You've lived with the Couchbase product. I feel like the NoSQL databases feel like maybe a more natural fit to Kubernetes because failure is kind of part of the architecture, right? The NoSQL piece of it, eventual consistency is a little more familiar. Like, what are some of the things that the way that you think about the Couchbase platform, sort of NoSQL on Kubernetes? Where do you see the sort of synergies, if you will?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's in my opinion, it's like perfect marriage in some sense. Like, it marries really, really well. So as you said, it's a NoSQL database. It's a distributed architecture, right? So we scale out. Mm-hmm. So if we need more capacity, we add more, horizontally scale the cluster. So one of the unique things we have done in Couchbase to add on to the same architecture perspective was we have something called multi-dimensional scaling, and we basically break our workloads, like the database workload, into multiple services, and so it's like bringing microservices in database, right? Okay. So we have a data service for all the CURT operations, like create, update, delete documents kind of operations, and then we have a query service which handles all your the SQL-like queries which you're executing, and so all the SQL execution goes to the query service. And then there's an indexing service which is basically making your queries performant. And then we added on that same platform, we have full text search, eventing, which is for running the functions, and then there is an analytics service. So each of these works as a services in our platform. And so just imagine when I put this on the infrastructure, when I'm deploying it, each of those get deployed on the containers. They in Kubernetes words, like they get deployed as a pods. And each pod can have a different specification. I can have more memory for my data service. I can have more CPU for my index and the query service. So you can basically have a heterogeneous cluster, and you can scale them independently without impacting each other, right? So, and that along with the ability to basically deploy on the containers and scale horizontally, it makes it much better solution in my opinion.
Yeah, I would think it it's like you said, when you're able to sort of break up kind of the functionality, some of them need scale, some of them need performance, and given the fact that Kubernetes is deterministic, I feel like it would almost enable your DBAs or even your application teams to go, oh, I don't have to think about some of that automation. I don't have to think about some of those things. It's just kind of there for them, which seems to be would be very beneficial to them.
Yeah. Absolutely, exactly, right, and that's kind of how we got started. And the initial, as I said, the Amadeus, when they gave us requirement, it was about, hey, we want the provisioning to be fully automated. It should be a single click. Everything should be, the Couchbase cluster should be deployed, configured with the best practices guidelines, and this whole provisioning should be fully automated. And so that was the number one goal, right? And then number two was like, hey, we want the self-healing to be fully automated. And so then started building on those advanced capabilities, which is, hey, we want the upgrade to be fully automated. We want the RBAC security for the database to be fully automated. And so we started the journey of operationalizing all the database activities. And so at this point, I would say that we are 90 to 95% of all the operations you can run on a database is fully automated with the Couchbase Autonomous Operator for Kubernetes.
Interesting. One of the things that I hear quite a bit as to why people are interested in Kubernetes is that at some point they say, well, inherently it has some interesting characteristics about how I run applications, but it also potentially lets me run things consistently in multiple places. So maybe I do some stuff on-prem or I do it in a cloud. Do you see that as people wanting to extend that up to the database as well? They just want the underlying infrastructure to more or less look the same?
Yeah, and this is the core requirement. Actually, every time I get on the call with customers, and again, I can't name some of the customers, but I can tell you, most of these customers, when I get into the call, this is one of the requirement for them, especially for the financial customers. And I have literally met and talked to a lot of these customers. They prefer this ability to port, build once and run anywhere, right? So it's their goal is hey, we have a private cloud, we run Red Hat OpenShift on our on-prem, and we want to run the Red Hat OpenShift on the IBM cloud, for example, and they want to be able to build once and be able to deploy, and even in some cases have a Couchbase cluster on the on-prem, have a Couchbase cluster on the IBM cloud, and be able to replicate the data and have an active, literally active setup between these two. It's most of the time it comes up.
Yeah, that was the kind of the next thing that came to mind. Is I was wondering, are you seeing use cases where people say, a lot of times we'll hear about hybrid and multi-cloud, and they're sort of their own islands, but they'll use more than one. Do you see some use cases where people want to span them across clouds, or is some of the data gravity stuff make that too difficult to do?
Yeah, so typically, what we have seen and again, this is also one of the best practices guideline from Couchbase is we have a different solutions for many of those use cases, like for high availability, for disaster recovery. So typically, what we tell customers is, if you're deploying a Couchbase cluster, and we in fact recommend them to deploy across multiple availability zones, like if you're deploying on the cloud. Sure. But if you're deploying it on the on-prem, deploy across multiple racks. So because it gives you much more protection from the failures. Right. And so between the different regions, let's say if I have a East region and then East data center and then West Coast data centers, in that case we typically advise them to have a cross data center replication. So it's two different clusters connected using this cross data center replication. And then you can still have active. We can read and write the data on both the sites. We have different mechanisms to handle the conflicts, like we have conflict resolution technologies. But the idea is in this region case, we typically don't advise them to stretch the Couchbase cluster, have a separate Couchbase cluster, and then connect them using this replication technology.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that makes sense. That's typically what we hear as much. It sort of maintains better sort of blast radius, if you will, or failure domains.
Exactly.
And,
Yep.
I'm curious. KubeCon is going on and go on for a week or so, and there's a lot of projects beyond Kubernetes that are happening in the CNCF. What are some of the other areas that are sort of adjacent to the database that you're seeing people, as they're building new applications, technologies that they're like, oh, I want to combine this and Couchbase, or these couple things are going to help my application developers?
Yeah, no, I think this is kind of the way I'll tell it is when I told you that my focus in the company has been cloud native database, and so typically I get this question is what is cloud native database, right? So, and obviously you'll say a very good definition on the CNCF, and it's all about the extensibility and scalability and all of that. So from deriving the same definition for Couchbase. So in our terminology, like the cloud native, why we call ourselves a cloud native database is we have built a stack of all these cloud native technologies. Starting with Kubernetes, we picked obviously the Kubernetes as our orchestration technology, and then we picked. So when we then we added storage. So we picked the storage classes, the Kubernetes storage classes. Like we have support for Ceph, GlusterFS. Each managed Kubernetes services, their storage classes, even Portworx. So we integrated with all those storage classes. Then when we looked at the observability as one big area where how does the customer want their observability solution, right? So they want to look at full stack automation or full stack observability. And so then we started looking at what are the de facto standards in terms of observability. For monitoring, it was Prometheus. For logging, it is Fluentd. So what we have done is we have picked all those de facto standards in the CNCF and started building those in Couchbase. So we have a monitoring solution for Prometheus. We have Fluentd for centralized logging. We have Istio for networking. So if I show you if we go to a Couchbase.com and cloud native page, you'll see there's a stack of all these cloud native technologies we have built in the product.
Okay, yeah, and that makes sense. That's number one, it allows you to give people sort of what's newest innovation and so forth. But I think even more so, they're not having to mix kind of what feels like legacy technology with stuff that's container specific and so forth. That makes a ton of sense. Let me ask you one last question, because
Sure.
the other topic that always comes up, you talked a little bit about, do I run stuff on cluster versus off cluster? I see this other sort of thing that confuses people sometimes, which is, do I run things on Kubernetes? Do I run them off Kubernetes? So, and off starts to get into these interesting kind of offers, like, do I consume a database as a service? Are those databases as services, quote unquote, serverless, meaning I don't have to do a lot of the ops? Like, how does Couchbase start to think about these other ways that people want to consume technology? And it's a trade-off between, like, is it a standalone thing? Is it a managed thing? Like, how do you tend to think about that? And like, where do you see your customers asking more than other places?
Sure. So typically, Brian, what I've seen is, like, customers, there are two different aspects. One is within the same platform. Let's say if I'm deploying my microservices, what are the design patterns for my microservices to connect to the database, right? So there's one which is like, I have all this microservices talking to a centralized database. So you have one single Couchbase cluster talking to all these microservices. There are some really pros and cons in this case. The pros is obviously there's a consistent data across all the microservices, and also it is and there's no data sprawl, so it's like all consistent data, and it's easy to maintain, easy to upgrade, and all of that. But then there's also another design pattern where for performance reasons, or for each microservices, they want to have a data service, which is co-located with the microservice. So for performance reason, for data governance and data sovereignty reasons, so in this case, like you have a Couchbase cluster, like a mini Couchbase cluster, like it'd be with the only 3 or 4 data service running. That would be running much closer to the microservices. So this is one aspect of it, which is about like how the microservices are the data service work with microservices. Then there is the second part, which is like about the security and compliances itself. Like, should I be running my applications in the same platform as my database? And so, although there is a namespace, and there is also you can put your network policies and security policies on top of this namespaces, but still there are customers who wants to basically separate out the application from the database. So they run all their applications on a different platform, a different OpenShift cluster or Kubernetes cluster, and then there is a database cluster again that's separated out, where all the other applications connect to the centralized database. And so we have seen all of this approach, and as I said, like, there are pros and cons, and it's really the architects looking into the project of like how they want for their use cases, for their needs, how they want to deploy and run the data service, right? So there are challenges with, if you're running applications on a different OpenShift cluster or Kubernetes cluster, there are solutions there for networking, which is like external DNS and forward DNS, but then obviously it gets a little bit more complicated versus if you're running everything in the same Kubernetes cluster, for example.
Right. Yeah, no, and I really was curious. I see similar types of things in the Kubernetes world where there are, at one point it's the same technology, but it's, I want it managed? Yep. How much do I want to customize it? Where does location matter? And so, I was curious if that extended to the database, and it absolutely sounds like the good news. I mean, the good news is like, you can get what you want where you want it, but figuring out what it is always the choice point. So
exactly, that's very true. Yep.
Well, listen, I'm going to wrap up because I want to be conscious of time. If people want to engage either with you or with your team working on cloud native stuff, what are some of the best ways to do that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I would definitely encourage them to connect with me. And so it's very easy to remember. It's anil@couchbase.com. Yeah. And there is also an there's also an alias, which is Kubernetes@couchbase.com. So, or Docker@couchbase.com. So there are multiple IDs where you can reach out. And also another best place to get started is like, there is forums.couchbase.com. If you get started with trying out Couchbase on Kubernetes or OpenShift, if you have any questions, post your questions on the forums, and our team is right behind there to help out with any of those questions.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, it's especially with some of the cloud native events going on these days, people want to try stuff, they want to get some feedback. So that's awesome. Listen, Anil, thank you so much for the time today. Like I said, this was a topic that was sort of a follow-up just because, again, we're seeing so much demand or so much interest around Kubernetes. So it's great to follow up with the data side of things. Folks, with that, I want to thank Anil for his time today. I want to thank everybody, as always, for listening to the show, for telling a friend, for helping us grow the community. And with that, I'm going to wrap up, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.